Hey guys, tonight we're floating into a world where maps are invisible, stars are signposts, and waves whisper secrets only the trained can hear. You're barefoot on the woven mat of a canoe deck, drifting under the southern sky. The ocean breathes beneath you like a live thing. You lie back, the salt clinging to your skin, and feel the pulse of waves through your bones. Slow, deliberate, like someone tapping Morse code through your ribs. This is how Polynesian navigators read the sea, not with charts, but with their bodies. You're going to learn to do it too. Or, try, because you probably won't survive this test unless you've got the reflexes of a Jedi and the patience of a monk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not navigating in the usual sense. Not steering. Not watching landmarks. Not checking a GPS ping. Instead, you lie flat in the hull of your canoe, your body stretched like a human antenna. You've been taught to feel the sea the way blind readers trace braille, delicate but deliberate. With every rise and fall of the canoe, your back picks up on the presence of swells, their direction, and, if you're really paying attention, how far away land might be. This isn't poetry. It's precision. The Polynesians called it telapa, a word that refers to the flickers of energy that radiate through the sea from island to island. But they also used a more tactile technique, body sensing. You feel the ocean's movements with your legs and hips, registering the larger swells, called moana, and the cross-chop of smaller, local waves bouncing off at odd angles. A skilled navigator could detect up to 5 different wave sets at once. You're trying to notice just one. Your guide, an elder with skin like dried tapa and eyes that know exactly how much you don't know, tells you to relax. The canoe moves, but it's not rocking randomly. The ocean has a rhythm, several actually, and each wave train is a kind of language. The dominant swell is the most important. It's like a North Star but liquid. Generated by distant storms hundreds or even thousands of miles away, it holds a steady course across entire oceans. Polynesian navigators knew how to feel for it, and they trusted it more than the stars. Why? Because even when clouds obscured the night sky, the ocean never forgot where the storm came from. Mainstream historians acknowledge the brilliance of Polynesian wayfinding. You've probably heard of the Hokulea, the replica canoe that voyaged thousands of miles in the 1970s, using no instruments, just ancient techniques. But that's just the Instagram-friendly surface of it. The real magic was in the navigator's body. His spine acted like a seismic reader, his ears like tuning forks. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some navigators would keep a thin stick or a line trailing in the water, tied to a finger or toe. As the canoe moved, the resistance would change, like a primitive haptic feedback device. If the stick twitched or pulled differently, it meant the wave pattern had shifted. It sounds absurdly low-tech, because it is, but it worked. Historians still argue whether this level of wave reading was truly widespread or reserved for an elite few trained from childhood. Some believe that only a handful of master navigators could feel these nuances, while others suggest every crew member developed a degree of sensory awareness just by sheer exposure. After all, if you're out at sea for weeks at a time, your body starts noticing things your brain doesn't even register, like how the canoe vibrates slightly differently when a squall's building 2 days away. It's pitch dark now. The stars are out, sure, but tonight you're focusing on your body. The guide gives no instructions. He just smiles, and you begin to notice something subtle. The canoe rocks gently east to west. Every few minutes, there's a longer, slower rise, like a breath drawn deep. That's your dominant swell. Then there's a short, sharp lift from the port side. That's local wind chop. You feel a strange double bounce pattern from the stern, like a beat out of sync. That might be reflection off an island you haven't seen yet. By the way, this whole exercise? You're doing it without opening your eyes. And no, there's no app to help. Your guide hums softly, something between a chant and a lullaby. It's not just to soothe you, it's to help pace your awareness. Some wave patterns take 15 seconds to fully pass. Others are quicker. By syncing your breath to the rhythm, you stop fighting the motion and start riding it. The canoe becomes an extension of your body, and the sea, weirdly, begins to feel almost predictable. Almost, because here's the real twist. The ocean's signals aren't constant. The dominant swell might weaken, replaced by a new one from another storm. The local wind might shift direction. A distant atoll could start deflecting waves your way, adding a subtle curve to your ride. A good navigator doesn't memorize a fixed chart. They constantly adjust to the sea's changing mood. It's like jazz, improvised, responsive, intuitive, but don't romanticize it too much. You're cold. You're tired. Your legs are cramping, and your back feels like it's been hammered with coconuts. Still, for a brief moment, you think you sense it. Just a fraction of that strange, silent language. A little pulse under the stars, tapping through your spine. Maybe you're getting it. Maybe. You don't see the island. You shouldn't. Not yet. It's still over the horizon, tucked beyond the curvature of the sea, invisible to the eye. But you feel it. The waves tell you. This morning your guide pointed behind the canoe and asked, "Where's land?" You shrugged. All you saw was open ocean. He just smiled, cupped his hand in the water, and gestured to the gentle ripples bumping against the canoe's stern. "Feel that?" he said. "That's a shadow. Except there's no sun and no literal shadow." He meant a wind shadow, or more precisely, a disruption, an anomaly in the natural pulse of the ocean. Because when wind hits an island, even a tiny dot of land in the middle of nowhere, it changes, and those changes carry across the water like a scent on the breeze. You're learning to detect these invisible signals, not by sight, but by feel, and sometimes even by sound. And tonight's wave pattern is all about those island echoes, the quiet traces left behind by land that interrupts the ocean's endless rhythms. Polynesian navigators used the term taumua for the area ahead of an island where the swells start to bend, warp, or reflect. It's as if the island is whispering through the water long before you see its silhouette. One of the weirder facts you'll hear on this journey is that experienced wayfinders could sometimes guess the type of island they were nearing: a high volcanic peak, a low coral atoll, or a reef shelf, just by how the waves shifted. You might laugh at that, but hey, you can probably tell the difference between walking barefoot on wood, carpet, or tile, right? Same idea, just wetter. You lean over the edge of the canoe now, dragging a hand in the water. It's not just ripples. There's a rhythm to how they push back, a slight delay. Your guide calls it hakakai, the echo swell. It's a reflected pattern, like a mirror bounce from waves that hit land and return. Think sonar, minus the beeping. Even better? It works over huge distances. A big island might reflect swells back 30 or even 50 kilometers. Here's something mainstream scholars agree on. Islands disturb wind and wave patterns more than we realize. The problem? These disturbances are extremely subtle. So subtle that for a long time Western scientists dismissed the possibility that people could navigate by them. Until, of course, someone actually proved it. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, modern crews retracing ancient Polynesian routes began using traditional techniques, guided by elders who never used maps. They found that even blindfolded, some navigators could tell whether they were approaching land purely by feeling changes in pitch, vibration, and the way their canoe swayed underfoot. Not convinced? One navigator famously predicted landfall before sunrise based on how the canoe's rocking shifted while he slept. Historians still argue whether this was intuition honed by habit or actual reading of physical signs. Some skeptics claim the guides were just using a lifetime of micro-clues, smells, clouds, bird calls. Others defend the practice as a legitimate, trainable skill, even comparing it to how blind musicians hear the space around them through acoustic feedback. You notice now that the wind has changed, not in strength, but in texture. There's a smoother patch ahead, like the ocean's been ironed flat. That's your wind shadow. The island's bulk is blocking the airflow, creating a zone of calm in its wake. You aren't in that shadow yet, but you're headed toward it. You can almost feel the absence of wind before it happens, like the hush before a storm, but in reverse. Then there's the reef whisper. This one's harder to explain. As the canoe glides on, you start hearing a soft, distant rustle. Not the wind, not the sea slapping the hull. It's the reef. Even when the island is still miles away, its reef breaks the waves. The result is a far-off hiss, a frothy hush, a kind of watery static that's so consistent it almost blends with your thoughts. Some navigators trained their ears to recognize it. Louder reefs meant wider shelves. Intermittent noise hinted at narrow channels. And here's your quirky fact of the day. Some Pacific Islanders even trained children by placing them in the hull of a canoe and towing them slowly toward different islands, not to see land, but to feel it arrive. Kids would be told to close their eyes and listen, sense, detect. It was navigation as somatic education. No flashcards, no quizzes, just wave, whisper, and wind. Tonight, the stars are starting to blur as a mist rolls in. Visibility drops. No problem. You're still tuned into the water, and honestly, you're doing better than expected. You recognize that the canoe is drifting diagonally across the dominant swell now, which would usually feel wrong. But your guide just nods. We're sliding into the shadow, he says. He means the silent footprint left by the island's presence. In this zone, the sea feels less random, almost guided. The guide gestures again, pointing just off the port bow. Soon, he mutters, and you believe him. Even though your brain's still screaming, there's nothing out here. Your bones disagree. Your spine has noticed the rhythm change. The pattern of the canoe's roll is different now. Less jostling, more glide. The waves have begun to flatten subtly underfoot, like a carpet being laid ahead of you. And here's the kicker. Seasoned navigators could use these very shadows to make corrections. If they didn't feel the telltale signs when expected, they knew they'd drifted off course. Imagine trying to steer toward a moving whisper and getting scolded by the sea when you miss it. Humbling, to say the least. So tonight, as you drift in the dark, no GPS, no compass, no sight of land, only soft wave signatures and the occasional choral hiss, you start to feel like you're navigating by ghost trails. And maybe, just maybe, those ghosts are leading you home. The weather turns. Somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, a squall is rising. Angry clouds, whipped spray, wind curling in tight, toothy spirals. The sky darkens fast, and the first gusts reach your skin like the breath of something ancient and impatient. Your guide glances up, frowns, and says, "Hold." But you're not steering the canoe. You're listening to it. Here's the truth you're about to learn the hard way. Even in storms, the sea keeps one promise. It always remembers its deepest rhythm. That's what you're trying to find now, the pulse beneath the chaos. Every storm churns the surface, creates messy chop, erratic gusts, and unpredictable motion. But beneath that, there's usually one dominant swell that doesn't flinch. It came from far away, formed long before the storm even existed. It's steady, subtle, and if you know how to feel for it, it will lead you to safety. So in this mess of water and wind, your job is to find that one wave train still behaving, which sounds impossible, until you lie back down on the hull and let your legs go loose, your arms drape, your head tilt slightly so one ear listens to the canoe itself. You're not fighting the movement anymore. You're joining it. This technique is no exaggeration. Traditional Polynesian navigators called it noho ilalo, sitting below. Not just literally under the stars or low in the canoe, but mentally beneath the chaos. It's the art of feeling below the storm's tantrum to the long wave heartbeat rolling under it all. In the middle of the Pacific, far from any coast guard, that pulse can mean the difference between life and drifting endlessly. Historians agree that Polynesian canoes, despite being small by modern standards, were remarkably seaworthy. Long, double-hulled vessels with curved prows designed to ride high over waves and bounce along with the sea's energy, not against it. But no matter how clever the design, It was the navigator's senses that really kept the crew alive. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some navigators carried wave-reference stones. Small, flat coral pebbles shaped to match the pitch and interval of familiar wave patterns near home islands. They'd finger them during the journey like tuning an invisible instrument. Scholars still debate whether these were mnemonic devices, prayer tools, or just really fancy fidget toys. Probably all three. Your storm intensifies. The sky flings water down sideways, and the stars are gone, blotted out as though someone smeared ink across the sky. You're soaking wet. The canoe shudders with each gust, and the sails have been dropped to keep it from capsizing. Everyone's quiet now, except the sea. Even in this chaos, you notice it. One long, slow rise. Every 14 seconds or so, a soft lift, a longer pause, then another. That's your deep swell. It's not dramatic. It's stubborn. Historians still argue whether ancient navigators could really follow swells across hundreds of kilometers in rough seas, or if they were reading too much into smaller cues. Some claim the success of long voyages was due more to redundancy, launching multiple canoes and hoping some made it. Others counter that the consistency of oral traditions, star compasses, and wave maps point to intentional precision. After all, finding a 2-kilometer-wide island in an ocean 10,000 kilometers across doesn't happen by accident. You shift your weight slightly and feel it more clearly now. That rhythmic rise. It cuts through the storm like a drumbeat under static. Your guide places a palm on the deck beside your head and hums softly, a pattern that matches the rise. You hum with him, syncing your body's rhythm to the wave. It's not mystical, it's muscle tuning. Your canoe is caught in multiple patterns right now, but this is the one you trust. This technique has a name too, telapa, not just flickers of light across the sea, which we'll get to later, but also referring to the sense of continuity and movement. You're latching onto it like a blind person gripping a rail through a crowd. The storm won't last. That's one mercy of Pacific squalls. They're dramatic but brief. Within an hour, the worst of it has passed. The rain slows to a drizzle. The wind drops like a stage curtain. And with the sky beginning to clear, a few defiant stars peek through, blinking like latecomers to a party. Your crew begins bailing water, laughing softly with that "we survived again" tone. Someone offers you dried breadfruit. It's awful. You eat it anyway. Now's when the real skill kicks in, because after a storm, the sea is confused. Multiple wave trains arrive from different directions. Reflected swells from unseen atolls, cross-chop from islands you didn't pass, ripples from last night's wind. It's like listening to 5 conversations at once in a language you barely understand. But remember that steady wave? It's still there, faint, but faithful. You close your eyes again and feel for it. This is where modern scientists start sweating. How do you prove someone can detect a wave pattern with their skin and ears? You can't hook them up to a wave-detecting EEG. But during modern experiments, trained navigators consistently identified direction and distance with alarming accuracy, enough to reach target islands within a day of their calculated arrival. No instruments, no correction. Some of them credit their inner ear. Others say it's the hull of the canoe itself, a giant sensor. One navigator compared it to riding a heartbeat through a body the size of the ocean. That heartbeat is still beneath you now. The stars return slowly, one by one, constellations like tattoos on the sky. Soon you'll use them to confirm your heading. But in this moment, your navigator's mind relies not on what's above, but what's beneath. The storm is over, but the sea is still speaking. You're still listening. Your legs are going numb again, not from cold this time, but from focus. You've been lying still in the hull for hours, letting the sea press stories into your muscles. And now, at last, you're starting to notice something else. Something the guide hasn't pointed out yet. Your canoe dances differently than it did this morning. It's subtle, more of a tremble than a step. It doesn't rock violently or bounce around. Instead, the motion feels like a hand drum beat you didn't know you were hearing, until you'd already tapped your fingers to it. It's not the sea that changed, it's the way your canoe interprets it. Every canoe has its own personality. That's your lesson for tonight, and not in a romanticized, the canoe is your spirit animal kind of way. No, this is about the specific, physical characteristics that affect how each vessel responds to the ocean's signals. The curve of the hulls, the tightness of the lashings, even the thickness of the woven deck. It all adds up to a unique vibration signature. Polynesian navigators knew this. They didn't just memorize routes. They memorized how their specific canoe danced with the sea. You sit up slowly and glance around. The sky is streaked now with thin cloud belts. Stars wink above, and the moon is still hiding, casting the whole ocean in quiet shadow. You press your hands to the deck. The canoe hums faintly, almost like purring. The vibration isn't sound. It's feedback from every wave it rides. The guide catches your look. "Feel it?" he asks, amused. You nod. "It's different." He grins. "Always is." This might sound like poetic nonsense, but here's your mainstream fact. Experimental voyages using replica canoes confirmed that different vessels react to identical sea conditions in noticeably different ways. Slight differences in construction lead to subtle shifts in how the canoe pitches, rocks, and shudders. Experienced wayfinders cataloged these differences, the way a guitarist knows the tone of each string. One navigator likened the process to learning how your horse breathes. Another said that when he stepped into a new canoe, he started from zero until he learned its signature motions. Now for your weird tidbit. Some old canoe builders were known to sleep inside the newly finished hull before it ever touched water. Not for luck, but to listen. They claimed the canoe would sing in dreams if it had the right shape. Some even talked to it out loud, asking it how it wanted to move. Whether you buy that or not, the truth is that knowing your canoe's rhythm could save your life. You lie back down again and listen with more attention. The deck pulses under you, not randomly but with familiar patterns. There's the longer lift from the deep swell. There's the high-frequency chatter of the wind chop. But now you can tell when the canoe likes a wave. It glides smoothly, effortlessly. Then there are waves it dislikes, where it shivers, judders, hesitates. You start to map this in your head. Not the waves, but the response to them. You're not reading the sea directly anymore. You're reading how the canoe reacts to the sea. Historians still argue whether this ability to tune in to canoe-specific feedback was something that could be taught or was more instinctual, like perfect pitch in music. Some say the best navigators were those who spent the most time building and repairing their own vessels, forming a kind of physical bond through the work. Others argue that anyone exposed long enough to the ocean would start to pick up on the subtleties without even realizing it. Back in the modern world, this might sound absurd. You're used to dashboards and error messages. If something's wrong with your car, a little orange light blinks. But out here, it's the slight change in how the bow slaps the water, or the way the deck vibrates when you pass over a reflected swell. These are your warning lights, and they only work if you're listening. Tonight, the canoe starts to jiggle. Not a wild jolt, but a quick shudder from stern to bow, like a cat flicking water off its tail. Your guide raises an eyebrow. You feel it again. "What is that?" you ask. "Reflected swell," he says. "Something behind us." You twist around. Nothing but open water. He taps the deck gently. "An island we passed, still talking to us. That's the beauty of it. The canoe doesn't forget. Even after you've moved on, the sea and your vessel keep exchanging information. Think of it like a scent trail left by a memory, curling backward across time. The water's already moved on, but your canoe hasn't. You're starting to understand now. When people talk about ancient navigators memorizing thousands of data points, star paths, cloud reflections, fish patterns, they often forget the most intimate part. Their canoe was part of the system, not separate from it. Like a violinist tuning by ear, not just reading notes, but feeling whether the resonance is right. Some modern scholars think this is the missing link in understanding Polynesian wayfinding. Not just environmental cues, but body and vessel feedback loops. you weren't just learning the ocean. You were becoming part of a system that included sky, water, canoe, and self. You lie back again. The canoe moves, and you can now guess where the swell is coming from before you open your eyes. That's progress, or hallucination. Either way, you're calmer than you've been all night. The deck hums under your ribs. Your guide begins a soft chant, rhythmic and low, repeating syllables that don't translate into English, but somehow make your heartbeat sync with the sea. You smile. You're getting it. The canoe is talking. And finally, you're starting to talk back. The swell has split. You don't see it, but you feel it. Two different rhythms now rocking the canoe, each coming from a different direction, like dueling drums beating out their own agendas. One lifts you from the northwest, the other presses in from the south. For the first time, you feel off-center, as if the ocean itself is whispering conflicting instructions. Congratulations! You've entered the crossroads of the sea. Polynesian navigators called these places vanishing points, where opposing swell systems met and intersected. This isn't chaos. It's a kind of cross-current harmony. You just have to learn to interpret it. Your guide has sat back, arms folded, eyes half closed, like he's listening to a song only he understands. He gestures gently with his chin. Now we're close. You raise your eyebrows. To what? Something. Super helpful. You lie back again, trying to tune in. The canoe's motion now follows two clear pulses, one slow and long, the other quick and snappy. It doesn't just rock up and down. It's starting to yaw slightly, rotating at the hips. Like a dancer switching rhythm mid-step. You let your limbs go soft and let the movements pass through you. Here's the trick. When wave systems intersect, they don't cancel each other out. They create what navigators called interference zones. These areas produce bounce lines, or standing waves, that pop up suddenly and seem to ripple in odd, almost geometric patterns across the ocean's surface. Sailors unfamiliar with them sometimes mistook these for optical illusions or shallow reefs. In truth, they were crossroads. Now for your mainstream fact, modern oceanographers recognize that long-distance swells from separate storms can meet and produce these wave interference patterns. These patterns can persist for days and travel vast distances without losing coherence. Polynesians were likely among the first humans to systematically observe and utilize them for navigation. But tonight, you're not observing them from a ship deck. You're inside them. The canoe now lifts at an angle, not forward, not sideways, but both. It feels like someone's trying to tip your mattress from underneath, while also pulling it in two directions. You brace instinctively, your guide chuckles. This is where you listen most. And now comes your quirky tidbit. Some navigators train themselves to detect these bounce zones by tying small shells to strings and hanging them from the roof of the canoe shelter. As the waves shifted, the shells would swing in unusual arcs. One way for a dominant swell, another for a reflected wave. And if they danced in a figure eight, cross swell. Basically, an ancient gyroscope made of seashells. You sit up slowly, scanning the horizon. Nothing. Not a bird, not a tree line, not even a color change in the water. But your guide is smiling. It's there. What is? Island. 2, maybe 3 hours. The swells say so. You nod like that's a normal thing people say. Meanwhile, your brain is filing an internal complaint labeled, "This is bananas." Still, you've come this far. So you tune in again. The southern swell feels warmer, if that makes any sense. It's rounder, more generous, like it's been softened by coral shelves or broken across a reef. The northwest swell, on the other hand, is sharper. Longer gaps between each rise, more force when it hits. Your guide points his toe at the port side. See how it rolls different? You feel it. The canoe rocks harder in that direction. Reflected, he says. From reef or land, south swell came in, hit something, came back to us. Historians still argue whether navigators actively used these cross patterns or just endured them until they could resume a cleaner course. Some suggest these zones were key turning points in wayfinding. used to identify the halfway marks between islands or the moment to shift headings. Others believed they were simply environmental speed bumps that required patience and grit. Either way, no navigator ignored them. You lie back again and let your mind settle. The rocking has become familiar. You're not resisting it anymore. You ride the northwest swell through one hip, the southern swell through the other. You begin to visualize it. Wave lines crossing like threads in a loom, weaving a watery tapestry with your canoe as the needle. The guide hums something, low and syncopated. You find yourself matching breath to the slower swell, heartbeats syncing to the faster one. And then, for the briefest moment, both swells align. The canoe glides straight, smooth as silk. That's it, the guide whispers. You found the seam. Apparently, there's a moment when intersecting wave patterns momentarily align to create a smoother path, what some called the seam wave. It doesn't last long, maybe a few seconds. But if you're paying attention, you can adjust your heading just then, letting the path of least resistance point your way forward. You sit up, catching your balance. Still nothing on the horizon, but the sea is now talking in stereo, and you, amazingly, are beginning to understand. Maybe not fluently, but enough to catch the mood. You close your eyes and trace the movements again. The canoe now moves like a compass needle shifting towards something not yet visible. But it's there. You feel it, and so does your guide. You're not in open ocean anymore. You're in a conversation. The water's changed again, but this time, not because of two intersecting swells or a new storm rolling in. This change is stranger, quieter. The canoe now rises and falls in soft arcs, like you're riding curves drawn by a lazy artist. You don't notice it right away, but your guide's posture has shifted. He's leaning forward now, watching the sea with a kind of reverence. You've entered the refracted zone. This is where the sea starts bending the truth. Somewhere ahead, an island sits just beneath the horizon, not close enough to see, not far enough to ignore. The swells that were once straight and predictable are curving now, refracting, not reflecting. They aren't bouncing off a surface. They're bending around it. It's wild to think about. Waves generated by storms thousands of kilometers away, traveling in a straight line for days, only to subtly shift their path as they pass near a small island. And even wilder? Polynesian navigators could detect those bends. You lie back down and try to feel the difference. It's not a jolt, not a tug. It's more like leaning into a turn in slow motion. The swell, once a steady beat, now has a slight twist to its rhythm. You start to notice that the canoe rolls just a breath earlier than it should, as though someone nudged the wave's shoulder before it reached you. Here's your mainstream fact. Wave refraction around land masses is a well-documented oceanographic phenomenon. When waves pass by an island or seamount, part of the wave slows as it meets shallower water, while the rest continues at speed. This causes the wave front to curve. Think of it like a car hitting gravel on one side. It pulls in that direction. Navigators used these gentle bends to triangulate position, even when the island remained invisible. Feel that curl? Your guide asks softly. You nod. It's bending left, he smiles. Not the swell. The island. It's a ridiculous phrase. But somehow it makes sense. You're feeling an object you can't see. The sea is translating its shape through the rhythm of movement. It's sonar without the ping. Now for your oddball tidbit. In some traditions, navigators weren't even told where they were going. They'd be placed aboard a canoe and told only to follow the curve. These apprentices would lie belly down on the hull for hours, sometimes days, until they sensed the bending patterns that indicated land was near. Only after successful detection would they be told the island's name. It was navigation as both skill and rite of passage. Historians still argue whether wave refraction could really be felt that clearly by the human body, or if it required a lifetime of practice to even begin to notice. Some researchers in the 1980s ran experiments using sensors on replica canoes, and while the changes in motion were incredibly subtle, trained navigators consistently detected them faster than the instruments could register. Whether that's proof or just really good guesswork remains up for debate. You press your palm flat on the deck and wait. The swell is now arriving in slight diagonals, still part of the same system, but gently warped. It feels like the sea's drawing you into a curve, like a slow-motion whirlpool made of momentum instead of suction. And you realize, if you were watching this from above, from a satellite or a drone, you'd see elegant arcs sweeping around invisible points. But you don't need a satellite, you're inside the arc. The guide stands and adjusts a small sail. "Follow the lean," he says. He doesn't mean to turn sharply or cut across the swell. Just align yourself with the natural curve, like catching the flow of a spiral staircase. And sure enough, when the canoe eases into that bend, the motion becomes smoother, less jostling, more glide. The canoe isn't resisting the sea anymore. It's flowing with it. You look to the horizon. Still nothing. Then again, maybe not nothing. There's a color shift in the sky. Not light exactly, but something in the texture of the air. A faint haze, a softening. Cloud shadow, the guide says. Could be over land. That's the thing about this stage of the journey. Everything becomes a suggestion. The sea hints. The air nudges. The clouds get vague. It's like a riddle whispered by the planet. The guide tells you to lie back again. See if the bend changes. And it does. Not dramatically, but enough. Now the swell seems to be wrapping tighter, as if drawing a lazy S around something just out of reach. That's how you know the island is closer. The waves are curving more sharply, navigating around it like respectful guests. You remember something he said last night. The sea doesn't hide things. It just makes them hard to hear. And now lying there, you realize this isn't about brute force learning. It's about patience, about letting the ocean talk and knowing when to shut up long enough to hear it. One last surprise. Some navigators used water clarity to double-check refraction signals. In daytime, the sea changes color near islands. You're still in darkness now, but soon the sun will rise and the canoe will begin to glide through lighter water. Even in pre-modern times, navigators knew that changes in plankton, temperature, and even bioluminescence signaled underwater reefs or shelves nearby. You rest your head back down. Your body is sore, but you feel something else now. A confidence forming. Not from certainty, but from trust. You're learning to trust the bend. The canoe shifts again. The arc is tightening, and somewhere ahead, the island waits. The first bird appears just after dawn. It flits low across the horizon, a flash of wings against the orange swell of early light. No land in sight, just ocean, sky, and that single deliberate flight. Your guide nods. Naughty. You wait, expecting more. He shrugs. They don't go far from home. That's your first solid clue. In Polynesian navigation, birds weren't just scenery. They were floating road signs. And this one, barely the size of a melon, is screaming something important in its quiet way. Land is close. You lean forward and squint into the hazy horizon. Still no island. But your guide? He's already adjusting the sail. The canoe shifts course a few points west, not because he sees anything, but because that bird told him where to go. Welcome to the part of wave navigation most people forget. The clues that aren't waves at all. Today, you're learning about all the weird, wonderful, overlooked signs Polynesian navigators used to find their way. Foam, color, wind, birds, and even scent. Yes, smell. We'll get there. You notice now that the water has turned strangely silky. Less chop, more sheen. It's not just the weather. It's the presence of something nearby that's smoothing out the water. The guide points to a white, frothy trail, curling in from the east and weaving away into the distance like the wake of a ghost ship. Reef foam, he says. Here's your mainstream fact. Coral reefs create distinct wave breaks and surface turbulence. Even before you see the reef itself, you can spot the foam it kicks up, or feel it in how the canoe suddenly rocks less and glides more. Experienced navigators use this foam to triangulate where the reef extended and where the pass might be. It's basically ancient radar, but fluffier. Now for your quirky tidbit, some voyaging traditions involved plucking a bit of this foam from the sea and sniffing it. Not because it smelled nice, but because each island's foam carried its own signature of seaweed, plankton, and mineral content. Yes, you're literally tasting the island before you see it. Your guide does it now. He scoops a little into his palm, rubs it under his nose, and nods approvingly. You copy him and immediately regret it. It smells like dead fish, low tide, and fermented cabbage. That's home, he says with a grin. You decide not to argue. Next comes the smell in the air itself. You didn't notice it until now, probably because your nose has been saturated with salt and wet wood for days. But this is different. There's a sweetness now, faint but distinct, something floral, something green. You take another breath. Guava trees, your guide murmurs. That feels like cheating, but it's not. Volatile organic compounds from vegetation can carry dozens of kilometers out to sea, especially in humid air and on dawn winds. Historians have documented this phenomenon, and it was widely used across Micronesia, Polynesia, and parts of the Indian Ocean. The trick was knowing the difference between generic, earth scent and a specific island's olfactory, fingerprint. Then come the clouds. They're stacking weirdly in the western sky, flat-bottomed, but puffing up into high vertical towers. If you were a satellite, you'd see why. They're forming over land. The heat rising from soil, rocks, and dense forests feeds those clouds all day long. This isn't poetry, it's meteorology. Your guide shades his eyes with one hand, then jabs a finger toward the buildup. There. Still nothing for your eyes to catch. But the combination of refracted swells, foam trail, dawn birds, and cloud formations, that's a full navigation suite. You're locked in now. And if that wasn't enough, here comes the last test. The nose test. Yes, that's really what some navigators called it. It works best in the early morning or late afternoon when air currents are gentle and bring subtle hints of landward scents. If you've ever stood on a beach and caught the smell of charcoal before you saw a barbecue, you know how this works, so you do the unthinkable. You stop watching and start sniffing. The breeze carries hints of wood smoke, crushed leaves, maybe even wild ginger. Your brain wants to dismiss it, but your nose says otherwise. There's something organic on the wind now. Something alive. Historians still debate whether this sensory approach, especially smell, was practical navigation or poetic exaggeration. But modern replicas like Hokulea have confirmed it. Smell can alert you to nearby land, especially low islands that offer few visual cues. It's not reliable on its own, but in conjunction with all the other signs, it completes the puzzle. You sit back, taking it all in. The oddly rhythmic waves still whispering underfoot, the faint foam curling beside the canoe, that lonely bird circling back again, and now the unmistakable perfume of island life drifting across the sea. This is how they did it. Not just with waves, but with every sense sharpened, every clue gathered. It wasn't magic, it was awareness. And now, as the light rises and the wind shifts, you see it, a green smudge on the horizon. Blurry, distant, but real, land. It should be a celebration, right? That green smudge finally morphing into an island. Mountain rising like a sleeping god. Palm trees catching the early gold of morning. But your guide doesn't smile. He's focused, quiet. His hands grip the steering paddle like a surgeon holding a scalpel. Because now comes the hardest part. Landfall isn't just about finding the island. It's about arriving well. The ocean has brought you close. But the reef? That's a different story. Cross it wrong, and the sea becomes a blender. One bad angle, one misread swell, and the same waves that whispered you here can turn violent. So how do you finish the journey? By training your body, not your eyes, not your thoughts, just your nerves, your balance, and your gut. This is where the schools of wayfinding come in. The places where these skills weren't just inherited, they were taught, drilled, refined, until they were instinct. You're about to meet that tradition up close. The guide gestures for you to switch places. You're at the steering paddle now. Your stomach tightens. He says nothing. The canoe begins to veer slightly in the wind. The reef is out there, a line of whitewater marking where the ocean breaks its back before crawling onto land. It doesn't look like a path. It looks like a dare. You feel your pulse sink with the canoe's subtle shift. Your feet brace automatically. You're steering now not with your arms, but with your hips, shifting weight, adjusting trim with your body. Because here's the secret. Polynesian navigation isn't just about understanding the ocean. It's about becoming part of the canoe. You don't command it. You merge with it. Here's your mainstream fact. Traditional Polynesian navigation was passed down through formalized oral schools like the PWO and Palu guilds. Apprentices underwent years of training not in classrooms but on the sea. They learned to read the stars, memorize hundreds of swell interactions, predict weather by cloud shape and wave slap, and most critically, train their bodies to detect change. And that training wasn't abstract. Some masters would blindfold their students and spin the canoe in circles for hours, then ask them to point homeward using only their internal sense of motion. Others had students lie in canoes tied to posts and memorize how wind chop differed from groundswell by skin alone. And here's a quirky gem. One school on Satawal Island reportedly trained children by having them float in outrigger canoes at night, while elders mimicked wind and water patterns with ropes, literally creating simulated ocean in the lagoon. It was like virtual reality, but damp, cold, and filled with terrifying uncles. Historians still argue whether these schools used mental charts, abstract memory palaces of swells and stars, or whether it was more embodied, knowledge coded into muscles and reflexes rather than cognition. Some argue it was both. A map that was stored not only in the mind but in the way your feet automatically shifted with changing wind. Your feet shift now. The canoe nudges left. You adjust without thinking. It feels right. Your guide finally speaks. Let the canoe read first. You follow it. You scan the reef again. There, a small lull in the whitecaps. It doesn't look safer, but it feels quieter. You aim the bow for it. He nods once. The canoe enters the surf zone. Water crashes around you, but the hull stays high, skipping like a stone. Your knees absorb the motion. You don't flinch. You can feel the energy of the reef now, not just its danger, but its rhythm. It wants to throw you, but only if you fight it. You don't. You yield. And just like that, the canoe slices through the pass, smooth and clean, past the breakers, into the lagoon. Inside, the sea becomes glass. Your shoulders drop. You didn't realize how tense you were. You glance at the guide. Still no smile, but he's relaxed now. He unties a bit of palm twine from the rigging and loops it once around your wrist. Now you've arrived. It's a small gesture. But in traditional wayfinding, arrival isn't just physical. It's acknowledgement. You're no longer a passenger. You've become part of the knowledge stream. Because here's the thing. The real work of Polynesian navigation wasn't memorizing maps. It was becoming sensitive enough to let the canoe, the wind, the birds, and the waves teach you everything you needed to know. Your training isn't done. Not by a long shot. But this first arrival, the moment you land not by compass, not by coordinates, but by feel, it changes everything. The island is quiet at first. Too quiet. After days of ocean rhythm, even the stillness of the lagoon feels disorienting. You step onto damp sand like someone adjusting to gravity again. Your legs wobble. Your ears are still catching phantom waves. But your guide isn't done with you. There's one final debate he wants you to feel in your bones, not just hear in a lecture. The mystery of how navigators remembered it all. Because let's face it, this whole thing is ludicrous. Thousands of kilometers of ocean. Dozens of islands no wider than a parking lot. Swells coming in from 5 directions. Bird types. Foam trails. Refracted currents. Smells. Stars. Wind textures. And they remembered it? How? That's the heart of the scholarly debate. Some say Polynesian navigators built intricate memory palaces. Mental models where each swell, star, and island sat in its own chamber. Others believe it wasn't about mental mapping at all, that the information lived not in the mind, but in the muscles. In reflex, you're about to test both theories. Your guide leads you to a patch of flat sand near the canoe, draws a circle with a stick, and begins sketching in it. Lines, arcs, notations that aren't writing exactly, more like musical measures. Star paths, he explains. These represent when stars rise and set. He draws another ring, wave directions, then another, island clusters. It looks chaotic, but it isn't. It's lived geometry, a symbolic ocean you carry inside your head. This is the mental map theory. The navigator as human GPS. A brain full of fluid, ever-shifting coordinates. The ETAC system in Micronesia is a good example. It used reference islands, imaginary points that move through the sky and sea, updated constantly using star bearings and swell cues, like playing chess on a board that breathes. And here's your mainstream fact. Anthropologists like David Lewis and Thomas Gladwin documented these cognitive systems extensively in the 20th century. They showed how navigators could hold complex, multi-axis spatial relationships in memory for weeks at a time, without written maps, without compasses, and with eerie accuracy. But your guide wipes the sand clean. No more, he says. Now feel it. He blindfolds you again. Here we go. You sit in the canoe, rocking gently in the shallow water. Eyes closed, hands on the deck. He gives you no instructions. Instead, he starts paddling. Within minutes, you're moving again. Not far, but enough. The swell, gentler than the open ocean, still speaks. You recognize its voice now, smooth from the south, crisp from the east. The canoe rolls lazily. You shift your weight not because you know what you're doing, but because your hips remember last night's rhythm. That's the other theory. That wayfinding wasn't mental mapping. It was muscle memory, learned through repetition until the body did the math for you. The canoe's tilt, the wind's whistle, the flex of rope across your fingers, all of it stored in the nervous system like a melody. Some scholars argue this muscle-based model makes more sense. After all, not every navigator could recite astronomical charts, but every skilled sailor knew how their canoe should move, and could feel when it didn't. Like a chef tasting a dish and knowing it's missing something, even if they can't name it. Your guide finally stops paddling. Where are we now? He asks, you have no clue. But your body? Your body knows. You feel the swell is coming from your right now, not your back. The canoe rocks longer, slower. That means deeper water, which means you're outside the reef again. You point south. Guessing. He removes your blindfold. You're almost dead on. He just nods. This training method isn't symbolic. It's full immersion, trial by saltwater. And some traditions took it even further. There are stories of navigators fasting for days before long voyages, meditating in canoes, entering trance states to visualize the sea ahead. That might sound mystical, but remember, modern athletes use visualization. Fighters shadowbox opponents in their minds. Pilots simulate landings in motionless cockpits. Same idea. Historians still argue whether these cognitive maps were as structured as we imagine, or if outsiders simply tried to impose familiar Western frameworks on something more fluid. Did navigators use stars as a literal compass, or as narrative cues, reminders of direction woven into chants, songs, even jokes? Maybe the map wasn't a map. Maybe it was a story. That's your final quirky tidbit. Some wayfinders encoded roots into songs. Long, complex chants where each verse referenced a wave type, a bird call, or the way the canoe should feel when crossing a certain reef. They didn't memorize coordinates. They sang them. Your guide starts humming one now. You don't understand the words, but the rhythm sounds familiar. It's the same one he hummed during the storm, the same beat you started to breathe with when the stars were hidden, and the swell held steady beneath chaos. It's not just a song. It's a course. You sit in silence, feeling the canoe drift with the incoming tide. The air is thick with salt and memory. You're not sure whether you just learned something ancient or whether your body simply remembered something it always knew. Either way, it worked. You're here. You spend one more night on the island. Not in a house, not on a cot. On the canoe, your back against the curved wood, your legs dangling off the side, toes grazing the water that laps softly beneath a starlit sky. The same canoe that brought you here, that read the ocean with you, now cradles your body like a parent watching over a dreaming child. You thought the journey was over, but now comes the part you didn't expect. The return voyage, and with it, the clash between the ancient and the modern. Because tonight, you're setting out with a mixed crew. Some trained in the old way, some not. A few carry GPS devices tucked into waterproof bags. Just in case, they say. But your guide? He won't touch them. He doesn't even glance at them. He stands at the stern, arms folded, eyes on the stars. Like nothing's changed since 1400, you push off at dusk. The island behind you becomes a silhouette, then a memory, then gone. And the sea? It hasn't changed. It never changes. Still humming, still pulsing, still speaking to anyone patient enough to listen. This is a revival voyage, part of a growing tradition across the Pacific, where younger generations are relearning the ancient methods, wave reading, star tracking, all of it. Canoes like Hokulea, Te Aurere, Gawalofa, and more now sail thousands of nautical miles again, guided by nothing more than bone, muscle, and story. But they exist in a world where satellite beacons are one pocket tap away. The question, can both worlds exist on the same deck? Here's your mainstream fact. Since the 1970s, there's been a quiet renaissance in traditional Polynesian navigation. Inspired by elders like Mau Piailug, one of the last master navigators trained in the old ways, entire fleets have been built, entire generations trained. And they work. These crews have sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti, from New Zealand to Easter Island, from Guam to Japan, without modern tools, but not without debate. Your crew's mood shifts as the night deepens. The young ones whisper around their GPS screens, checking coordinates. Some shrug off the traditional methods as symbolic, spiritual. "Cool stuff, but let's not get lost," one says. Your guide hears it. He doesn't flinch, he just hums again. That same chant. The one you've heard under stars, in storms, in silence. You decide to trust him. You lie down. Feel the canoe's pulse, and you notice something. The GPS tells one story, but your spine tells another. The swell has shifted. The wind has rotated. And your body, thanks to all those long, aching nights, recognizes it. You realize the canoe has drifted slightly off course. You can't see the error, but you feel it in your hips, your ribs, the way your shoulder is vibrating differently against the hull. A tiny deviation, no more than a few degrees, but enough to cost hours. You sit up and whisper to the guide. He nods once, adjusts the sail. 15 minutes later, the GPS confirms the correction. The crew is surprised. You're not. Now here's your final quirky tidbit. One modern wayfinder, after completing a 2,500-mile voyage with no instruments, later had his brain scanned by researchers. They found neural activity similar to that of elite chess players and symphony conductors, people who manipulate vast, complex patterns using intuition and learned instinct. Historians still argue whether traditional navigation will survive in the modern world. Some think it'll become a ceremonial relic, taught in museums, reenacted for tourists. Others believe it's already evolving into a new hybrid, where ancient techniques are preserved because they still work, not in spite of GPS, but alongside it. Your guide? He doesn't care about that argument. He's watching the stars now, tapping the hull in rhythm with the swell, letting the canoe tell him when to turn. You lie back again, and for the first time you don't need to ask questions. You don't need reassurance. You don't even need to know where you are. You feel it, and that feeling is the map. You're drifting now, not just on the canoe, but in your breath, your thoughts, the slow ripple of story still echoing through your chest. The ocean has quieted. The swell is soft again, rhythmic, like the exhale of a world too large to hold in your hands. You've come so far, from lying flat on a woven deck, unsure of what to feel, to tuning in with every cell of your body. You've learned to read wave patterns like a language, to hear islands in the silence, to trust a craft that has no engine, no rudder, only memory and patience. And whether it's true or not, whether the canoe really sings when it's shaped just right, or whether it's all imagination braided into tradition, somehow it doesn't matter. Because you listened, you learned, you remembered what most of us have forgotten, that not all guidance comes from screens. Sometimes it comes from wind, from foam, from the feel of your own breath matching a swell born 1,000 miles away. You let yourself slow. Let the edges of your thoughts blur. The stars blink softly above. The canoe rocks gently beneath. And the island, the one you left, the one you found, waits behind your eyes now, glowing faintly like a memory that never fades. You're not navigating anymore. You're resting. And in this stillness, you know, really know, that the sea will carry you safely through whatever comes next. Sleep easy now. You're exactly where you need to be. End of script. Sweet dreams.